Hello, everybody, and welcome to the NextGen Planners podcast. My name is Dan, and I'm the head of community experience here at NextGen Planners. And today, on the second hottest day of the year so far in the UK, we always seem to be recording these things on the hot days. I'm joined by Becca Timmins from When We Think. How are you doing today, Becca?
Yeah, I'm really good, thanks, Dan. Quite hot, but yeah, apart from that, good.
Yeah, you're like much further south than I am as well. So you must be even warmer because I'm in the cold north usually. So yeah, it's certainly not cold up north today though. So for anyone who doesn't know Becca, she is a thinking environment consultant, coach, and facilitator. And if you're thinking, what is the thinking environment? Don't worry, we're going to go through that in this episode. And she actually has her own business, which is called When We Think, as I've just explained that. But to kick things off, what we always do on the show, Becca, is we always like to give people a chance to tell us what they get up to on a daily basis. So you can take this in many different routes if you want to. You can either tell us step by step, as in like you wake up and you have your breakfast, or you can give us a kind of more broad view of what it is that you do on a daily basis. But take it away.
Cool. So, I mean, it depends on the day.
Mm.
I won't give you the full rundown of my day, but I've got three kids. I've got three boys, aged between 6 and 15, so they keep me pretty busy when I'm not working. But work keeps me equally busy. So first half of my week, I'm operations director for Emery Little financial planning firm. So you can probably kind of get what that entails, all the normal kind of operational stuff of running a financial planning business. And then at the end of the week, the back end of the week, I do my When We Think work, which is really varied. I do all sorts. I do one-to-one coaching, but also facilitate sessions for different groups. So I do some work with the Paraplanners Assembly, I do some work with Soul Millionaire, like different groups who come together and there might be some content that they want to share, but really kind of facilitating community experiences, really kind of growing groups. So I do a bit of that. And then also run training sessions, both open training courses that people like anyone can come on, but also running training for groups, and that can be either for people wanting to get better at kind of one-to-one listening skills, that sort of thing, learning how to kind of listen in a thinking environment way, but also people who want to run their meetings more effectively, who want to just learn to interact as groups better and get more out of people and all that kind of thing. So yeah, my week is pretty varied.
Definitely. It's definitely linked though, because one of the most important skills as a financial planner is listening. So it's definitely all linked together. And I think we should probably tackle the question that is in a lot of people, a lot of the audience's minds right now, which is what on earth is the thinking environment? So some people might have heard of it. Before we started working together, I had never heard of it before. I'm going to be completely honest. I am now a thinking environment convert because I think it definitely works. Um, but just to put it into context and just for our audience's sake, can you give us a kind of brief summary of how you would explain what the thinking environment is and also how it can help people as well?
Yeah, of course. So the thinking environment is based on two fundamental kind of observations. The first one being that the quality of everything we do as human beings depends on the quality of the thinking that we do first. So how well our meetings go might depend on how well we think about those meetings ahead of time. How well a difficult conversation goes might depend on how well we think about it ahead of time. Everything we do basically depends on how well we think about it first. And then underpinning that is that the quality of our thinking depends on how we're treated when we're thinking. So essentially, what a thinking environment is an environment within which people think really well. And the way we teach like the thinking environment through the time to think is the kind of the first book that this is based on, by Nancy Klein. The way we teach the thinking environment is it's like a set of behaviors, principles, and also practices, really specific things, ways that we can be with other people to consistently create environments within which people think really well, and that in meetings, on one-to-one, like any kind of human interaction, it just makes things go better.
Definitely does. And yeah, internal meetings is the kind of where we have found the biggest benefit to it. It's gotten to the extent now, actually, where once you understand what the thinking environment is, and once you've been in a thinking environment, whenever you have a meeting that's not in a thinking environment, it almost becomes like so obvious that it's like quite distracting, because you're like, God, if this was just done under the thinking environment, it would be so much more productive. But it's also useful with clients, like you just mentioned there. For this kind of stuff could be great for that element. But we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But first, we'll look at the internal meetings. So, especially now with things like virtual meetings, a lot of businesses have kind of carried on having virtual internal meetings between themselves. There's people out there who love that, and there's people out there who don't like that very much. But when it comes to all internal meetings in general, you must have seen some pretty bad ones over the years. So what are the biggest issues that you come across, or businesses come across, when they have internal meetings? What do you see the biggest challenges that they face?
So I think the biggest gripe is, like, there's a frustration very often that there's a lack of progress made through, spend all this time in meetings and we just don't get anywhere, or we're spending all this time in meetings and we're agreeing stuff and then nobody's following anything up, or there's kind of a lack of buy-in to whatever is supposedly agreed, or people taking away different views at the end of meeting. One person thinks that one thing happened and somebody else thinks something else happened. Like, that's quite a common one too. And as a result of all of that, a lot of people find or feel that meetings are just a waste of their time. Spending too much time in meetings, not getting anywhere. So I think there's loads of dysfunction in meetings generally, whether that's face to face or virtual. I think both. And I guess when we look at meetings in general, not just financial services, but across the board, we find that on average, 30% of people do 90% of the talking in most meetings. And that's what tends to happen in organisations, is that's the same 30% doing 90% of the talking in all of the meetings. And so you've got 60% of people, 70% of people who aren't really contributing, and aren't really, of course, they're not bought into the outcomes because they're not feeling heard, they're not talking, they're not speaking up. And you've got sort of certain people dominating a conversation, and it's generally the people who are just more kind of extroverted and more confident in themselves, and more comfortable putting their points across. I would say is never because those quiet people don't have anything to contribute. So yeah, that's where I get really excited about this work. It's like, oh, we're going to get to hear from everybody now, and then that really supercharges people's meetings, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest things that came out of the training that we did with you was the kind of the round robin style element, where you actually, every single person has to be in the room. So like, you have to identify that every person is there first, but also that you kind of go in a circle and listen to what everybody else has to say. That is huge, because that forces those 65% of people or 60% of people who don't usually get a chance to speak. Effectively, it forces the room to allow them to speak, which is huge. And you get so much more done. You definitely do. So yeah, I think that I would agree with that one. Another thing that is a problem in not just internal meetings, but just in the conversations that we have. I will probably interrupt you at some point during this podcast, and I know you're going to tell me off, and I know that that's awful. And it's just the kind of like human nature to not see that as such a big thing. But like you said to us in the past, interrupting someone is basically saying that what you have got to say is more important than allowing them to finish their sentence, which is, ridiculous when you think about it on the face of things. So we know that interruptions harm. We know that they're not good. They can be good in very limited, I think, in very limited circumstances. I know that you have a potentially different view to me on that. But if you could give the people in the audience kind of like the biggest tip that they can to reduce the amount of time they interrupt in meetings, what would that be? And I've got a feeling you're probably just going to say don't interrupt. But maybe a bit of a more kind of detailed thing of how they can not interrupt. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would ask people to ask themselves repeatedly is what you've just said there. Are you certain that what you have to say right now is more important and more valuable than what that other person is about to say or think? And that's equally important if the other person's speaking or if they've paused. Because what we're so good at doing, even if we've kind of got to the point where we don't interrupt, we don't talk over each other, we don't kind of overtly interrupt like other people speaking, what we're so good at doing as human beings is like waiting for the first pause and then jumping in. Like as soon as you take a breath, I've got something going on in my head, so I'm going to speak as soon as you take a breath. And actually, often, really often, what's going on in the silence is even more valuable than what's going on when somebody's speaking. So just to give you some numbers, we speak at about 125 words a minute as human beings. We can listen at about 400 words a minute, and we think at about 900 words a minute. So if somebody pauses for 10 seconds, imagine what's going on in those 10 seconds in their head. Like it's way more than they could convey in words. It's way more than we could listen to. But if we just let them finish their thought, what might come out at the end of that could be gold. Like, and we could have missed that if we'd spoken over them. So I think it's really helpful. I find it really helpful to just try and really focus on being interested in what the other person is saying rather than, and really trying to get away from trying to form my next reply. So I find the analogy of like, pretend you've got a whiteboard in your head, and the thoughts that come up for me as I'm listening to you, like imagine them as like words on a whiteboard. And as with a whiteboard, you can choose to wipe them away. So while somebody else is speaking, thinking, let them finish. Just keep wiping away your words on your whiteboard, knowing that if you listen to them right to the very end of what they've got to say, you're going to be better informed when you do come to respond. So yeah, I'm not sure that's kind of a succinct answer, but hopefully that gives a bit of a sort of broader view.
Yeah, I think yeah, well, my thing would just be don't interrupt. Right. It's an action. It's an active thing. You have to, because we've got so used to it now. You actually have to stop yourself from interrupting, and it's hard. It's not easy. It's not by no stretch. It's not easy. I think a lot of thing with the interruption side of it as well is that you potentially are going to forget what your point is if you allow the other person to carry on speaking. So that's where things like note taking and stuff like that can come in. Again, not taking the attention away from the speaker though, but just kind of somehow making sure that you don't forget what you want to say in response to them as well. So
Yeah, I think on that, often it can actually be more of a distraction to try to hold on to that thought than it can be just to scribble a note on a piece of paper in front of you. I completely agree. You know, if something is triggered, which of course it is when we're listening to other people, that's kind of how we communicate. When something's triggered, if you can just scribble a word, even without looking down, you know, you don't need to most of the time, just scribble a word to remind you of what that thought was. You can then park that and come back to listening. So yeah, I think that's a great one.
yeah, it works in the thinking environment because you've got no choice. So like when you're in an internal meeting, for instance, in the thinking environment, the person who's next to you has said something that you potentially want to add on to or that you don't agree with. Hard cheese, you know, you're going to have to wait until it comes back around again to have your turn. So you learn to have to make notes when someone else is speaking, even if like they're very succinct notes, like one word or something. And then when it comes down to you again, you can then have your say. And it's just, you know, it's more organized. It has. I mean, I know I'm sounding like I'm waxing lyrical about this kind of stuff, but it really, really does make a difference to internal meetings. And the way you describe it is that it pushes us to think courageously and independently, which is a beautiful sentence. And it's something that we often really don't get to do. Certainly not the independent bit. We really don't get to think independently very often, like really think. But to get us to do this, when you're working with people on the thinking environment, you take them through the 10 components of that thinking environment. Now, I don't want to give the people in the audience a kind of lecture on this kind of stuff, but if you could kind of summarize those 10 kind of components and just kind of briefly summarize them for people, I think that'll be really useful for those in the audience. So maybe just take us through those 10 and describe what they mean.
Yeah, of course. So, well, first of all, I am so pleased to hear you waxing lyrical about the thinking environment. You keep going, Dan. That's absolutely fine. So the headline component is attention. So paying really high quality attention to what the other person is saying or thinking, and we've talked about that as being really interested in where they're going to go next with their thinking, promising not to interrupt, that kind of thing. And then we'll move on to equality. So there's two parts to equality. One is trying to address that balance of that 30% doing 90% of the talking, making sure, really believing that everybody in the room is equal in their ability to think, and therefore giving everybody equal opportunity to think. So in a two-way conversation, trying to make sure that the balance of who's speaking is roughly equal. So equality is really important. Ease is then the next one, which is all about getting rid of that kind of internal urgency that we have so much of the time. Oh, we've only got 10 minutes left in this meeting. We need to make some progress, or I'm supposed to be somewhere else. No, I need you to, be quick. Just being present and there and easeful with somebody can make a huge difference. I don't know whether you have this, but I know a lot of people do, and I certainly do. If I'm typing and somebody's watching me, my fingers go all over the place. I can't do it because I'm not at ease in myself. When I'm at ease, I can just think, I can just be better. I can do things better. I can think better. So that's ease. Then we've got appreciation. And this is about understanding that reality is generally pretty good. We tend to have this negativity bias as human beings, but reality is normally pretty good. And so appreciation kind of forces us to ground ourselves back in what's going well, what do we appreciate about our situation, about the other person, all of that kind of stuff. And actually, it could be quite good to think about a ratio of kind of 5-1, positive to negative, like appreciation to criticism. So that's that one. Encouragement is the next component. And this isn't about rah, 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 cheerleading kind of encouragement. It's about giving the other person courage, as you say, to go to the cutting edge of their thinking, which is, I think it is a beautiful thing. We're told by social media, by newspapers, by everything around us tells us how we should think, and to be given the opportunity and the encouragement, to be given courage to go to the cutting edge of what we really think, I think is really rare. So that's what encouragement's about. Then what's next? Feelings is the next one. And this is, people can struggle with this a little bit at work, in a work context, but we're feeling beings, we're emotional beings, human beings. And if we're trying to not cry, or we're trying to suppress our anger, or even you're trying to suppress a giggle, you can't really think particularly well, And so this is about allowing sufficient room for the expression of feelings, because knowing that when we have expressed our feelings, we think better on the other side of that. So that's that one. Difference is super important. So this is about celebrating the inherent difference that we all bring to the table, be that difference in background, difference in knowledge, difference in lived experience, difference of opinion, different personalities, all that stuff. Because when we do that, when we really celebrate difference and have lots of diverging opinions around a table, the outcomes that we get are normally better. It challenges us to think differently, and so difference is a really important component. The next one is information. So, I mean, if you haven't got all the information you need, you can't think very well, can you? So that's what that one is about, basically making sure that you've got all the data you need, but also recognizing that, what I've just said, that everybody brings a different perspective, understanding that everybody has a different social context that they've grown up in. Your social context as a white man, having grown up in the North, will be different from mine as a white woman having grown up in the South, right? And we're probably relatively similar in, you know, in our experiences. So, you know, you can imagine kind of how wide that gets. The other part of information actually is kind of dismantling our denial around things. So what's staring us in the face that we're just not facing, that kind of thing. So information, just kind of getting everything out there. The last two, incisive questions, is one which can be amazingly powerful. This is about examining assumptions that we might hold around ourselves, around a situation, around a group, you know, all that kind of thing. And trying to kind of dismantle those assumptions and replace them with something more positive. You know, what are we assuming here that might be holding us back is a great question to ask. And the last one is place, which is recognizing, you know, there are certain places that I can be in where I know I matter and I know I'm going to think well. And there's other places where I'm not going to be thinking at my creative best. And so place is about creating a place for the other person to think in, which says back to them they matter. And that we found in when things have gone virtual, a huge amount of that is about the listener and about creating and holding a space within which the other person thinks really well. So, you know, we can do this for people by creating these, by really thinking about 10 components. We can create a place within which another person thinks better, which I think is an amazing thing.
Absolutely is. I don't even know where to start with all of those 10 to it. I've heard them before. The equality one's big, I think, for a lot of people. I think that's a big issue in meetings, is that the people who have this perceived power are often given the chance to speak a lot more than those who perhaps don't have the perceived power. And often that means that loads of great ideas are missed, which is not good. I also agree with you on place as well. You know, you, like you said, you really can't think very creatively or think very well if you're not in surroundings that feel safe to you, and that feel like somewhere where you can think creatively. So yeah, I'm not going to come back on every single one of those because it would take me forever. But those are the two biggest ones that we've found. And also, I mean, just to kind of finalize this point, the thing about everyone kind of being in the room is huge as well. How many times do we start meetings where one person doesn't say anything for about 35 minutes into an hour-long meeting or something like that, and then you're like, oh, I forgot they were even there. And just checking in is we've found really cool. You know, just saying, even it can just be making, just asking them what they're grateful for today or something like that. That is something that really works for us, just to make everyone feel like they're actually there. So yeah, I again, you know, really great components, and it definitely does work. Well, let's close off on internal meetings for now. So people in the audience will probably have a lot of internal meetings. So today is probably gone, like, as in, like, when people are listening to this, they're not going to be able to make a change today. So if we can think of one tomorrow, one actionable tip that they can take into their internal meetings tomorrow from all of the stuff that we've just been talking about there, what would you say is the biggest one that they can take into that first internal meeting tomorrow?
I would come back to what you've been talking about, Dan, thinking rounds. So when you first land in a meeting, if you're in person, it's easy. You're sitting around a table, you can just go around the room clockwise. Whoever wants to start starts, and then you go around the table clockwise, doing a check-in round at the beginning so that everybody has landed, everybody's entered the room, their voice has entered the room. It's amazing when you hear some people, the energy that it takes for some people to open their mouths in a meeting is something that many people don't realize. Those quieter people, it's not that they don't have anything to say, but the energy that it takes for them to put themselves out there, especially, you know, half an hour in when everybody else has been talking, is immense. And so if you take that away, if you just start the meeting by saying, you know, what's made you smile this weekend? Or, you know, it can be anything, any kind of icebreakery kind of question. That's amazing. And then on every agenda item, thinking rounds, it forces the more extroverted thinkers to kind of shorten what they're saying and be more concise, which I'm sure everybody's been in a meeting where you kind of wish, I really wish you'd just get to the point. It forces that to happen. But it also means that those more introverted people, the people that wouldn't normally contribute, there's an expectation on them to do that. There's a responsibility on them to contribute, which I think is really important too. So yeah, I mean, if you can just instigate rounds, if you're online, there's two ways you can do it. One, sometimes we create a virtual table, so just literally, everybody's name around a picture of a table in PowerPoint, something as simple as that. Or if it's less people, just read out the names as they appear on your Zoom screen. Everybody makes a note of who's before and who's after them, and then you've got your order, and that's the order that you follow through your meeting. So there's different ways you can do it online, but just everybody knowing when they're going to get their turn brings ease, because you know that you are going to get your opportunity to speak. You're not going to have to worry about putting your kind of cutting into the conversation. Where is it that I come in? And actually, because of that, interruptions fall away, because when you're going to have your turn. You don't have to cut across anyone else. So it kind of kills that one as well. It gets rid of that.
Yeah, it's so simple as well. I mean, it's literally so simple. You could just, you don't even need a virtual table. Like you said, you could literally just look at your Zoom screen, go from top left to bottom right and go in that order. And someone hosts the meeting, someone runs the meeting, and goes in that order. And it's literally so simple. And you don't need to know all the frameworks and the components and things like that to put that kind of thing into place. Something as simple as that. So I definitely agree with you on that one. Just give it a go as well. I mean, what's the harm? What is, there's literally no risks to this. There's no downside of trying this in your meetings. So it would really work. So let's now have a look at client meetings instead, because obviously a lot of people in the audience, the majority of people in the audience, will be involved in financial planning. And this kind of stuff, I think, could work really, really well in meetings with clients. I know it's particularly not really designed for it, but it definitely could work. So how do you think, like, how can this kind of stuff work in meetings with clients of financial planners, do you think?
I mean, I think this, I mean, it, for one thing, like it's not designed as such. This is observation of like just what's going on when people think really well. It's like an example of, it gives us a framework to work with for all human interactions. Like I use this stuff with my kids. I use it, with my partner. We've had thinking environment family meetings, would you believe? It can be all sorts of things. So I think it can work brilliantly well with clients. And I guess like your fundamental aim, I think, when you're a financial planner, is to really get to know your client really well, understand what's important to them, understand what their aspirations are, what their goals are, what they'd love to achieve with their lives, so that you can help them organize their finances in a way that's going to be best placed to support that. And the more you can listen, the more deeply you can listen, the longer you can listen for, the less you can interrupt them, the more independently they're thinking, the better you're going to get to know them, and the more you're going to hear about them, and the better you're going to be able to do your job, ultimately, I think. So yeah, I mean, if you can lean on all of that stuff around, attention, giving people encouragement, giving your client encouragement to go to the cutting edge of their thinking about what they would really love to do with their life, what's really important to them, and then being able to help them achieve that because you really understand them. Like, how much value is there in that for somebody? It's huge. So yeah, I think there's loads around that. I also think just being aware, and I'm sure this isn't the case in all situations, but for example, if you're with a husband and wife or two partners, often I would say one of them is going to dominate the conversation. Being aware of that equality, being aware of, well, actually, now what we've heard, what you think, now what do you think? What's really important to you, making sure that you're drawing that out and noticing when somebody isn't speaking. I think it's really important too, because ultimately, if they're together, you want to be working with them in a way that is together and not just based on one person's kind of dominant view. So yeah, I mean, I could say loads about how it could work in client meetings, but I think they're the two big things. I think just, if what we're trying to do is know our clients, like really deeply know our clients, then like this is so good for connection. so good for empathy, so good for just hearing more about what's important to people, and what really matters to them, getting down beneath the surface stuff to what really, really matters. And yeah, it's super valuable.
Yeah. I mean, I know that hundreds of people in the audience, they will have been doing this subconsciously. They won't call it, they won't have been calling it the thinking environment necessarily, but they will have been doing a lot of the stuff in the framework for the thinking environment in their meetings. And the best ones, are the ones where they just ask a really super duper open question, and then the clients get as long as they want to think on that question equally. And the amount of people who have said that the clients just didn't expect to be given that amount of time, and they've never had that type of space, and they've never really had the chance to think about this kind of stuff. Like, for instance, if someone asks them what they want to do in retirement, they've probably never been asked that question before, and it's such a different experience to what they expect. Like, proper financial planning is such a different experience to what they expect it's going to be. They think that you're just going to talk about products and pensions and investments and all that kind of stuff. And then when you start by asking them really open questions in a thinking environment that you perhaps didn't know it was, they're so shocked because they don't expect that from their financial planner, and they've never been given that opportunity to think like that before. It's huge. It is really huge. And your point about equality is definitely true as well. I mean, I've been in client meetings before where one person has absolutely had 90% of the time to talk. And then when you ask the other person, or when the other person gets the chance to speak, they've actually got so much to say, and they've actually got so much that they wanted to say, but they just weren't given the opportunity. And then before you know it, there's 10 minutes of the meeting left and they haven't got an opportunity to actually say it. So yeah, I agree with you. This stuff could be, and I think, like I said, a lot of this stuff is already being done by the great financial planners who are in the audience. And I know that a lot of you who are listening to this will be doing this already, but you just perhaps don't call it a thinking environment, which is good.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think, and that's kind of what I was saying before. This isn't a designed thing. This is when we are really at our best with each other as human beings. This is how we are. We're just not at our best with each other a lot of the time. And so it gives us a kind of framework to fall back on. The other thing, just for client meetings, which perhaps people are already doing, but perhaps is kind of an extra layer that could be even could help even more, is this question about assumptions. What are you assuming that's holding you back? What are you assuming that makes you think you can't do that? What are you assuming? So examining that, asking questions around assumptions can be really valuable. And then asking people, well, okay, do you think it's true? If that's what you're assuming, do you think it's true? And that, I mean, I've seen that be completely life-changing for people. Well, no, of course it's not true. Okay, well, I can assume something else instead then. And so it's like a switch has been flicked, and it's amazing. So yeah.
And also gratitude as well. A lot of clients really haven't had the opportunity to take stock of what they've got.
Yeah.
They really don't know how how much they've taken for granted over these years, and that the striving forwards towards something. And then they realize in those meetings, hang on a second, I've already got most of the stuff that I actually really value. And then they realize money's just a tool, and yeah, really, really good. So you've been working in financial planning for over 20 years, which is from your website, by the way. I haven't looked into it. And most of that time I think you've been spent in operations roles, which is, it's certainly risen a lot over the last few years. I think you definitely agree. Like, it's certainly in the last 5 years, I've seen it really grow into a really cool area of financial planning, is this kind of realization of how much an operations director or operations manager has a huge impact on a financial planning business. So working in the profession for 20 years, what are some of the things that you've seen financial planners do wrong? Again, I don't really like to call, I hate it when I see people saying these are mistakes you're making right now and you need to put them right and all that kind of stuff. So it's not so much do wrong, but it's certainly, for instance, could have improved, that we could have been fixed with the thinking environment. What kind of things have you seen that potentially the thinking environment could have changed over those years?
So I suppose there's two areas. The first is in client work, and I don't imagine that most of your listeners well, anybody involved in NextGen really would fall into this camp. But I think at its worst, if financial advisors aren't listening to their clients really well, it results in poor client outcomes. So I have definitely seen um, clients who have got investments they don't really understand, things organized in a way that isn't right for them actually and what they really want, and things having to be undone later because really it wasn't fully understood by the planner at outset what was most important to that client. And so the way that things have been, their finances have then been arranged, and what's been put in place hasn't actually been as suitable as it should have been, really, because the listening wasn't good enough at outset. A strong kind of feeling, well, I know best, I know what's going to be best for you. And therefore, this is what I'm going to recommend you do. We're in such a privileged, trusted position as financial advisors, financial planners, and that I think has been the case for quite a long time. That I think there's a responsibility to listen really well and to really understand. This is it's people's financial future, it's people's future, it's people's lives that you're working with. And so yeah, I think just so what could be better. I think people could always learn to listen better. I think you could always listen a bit longer, a bit deeper, understand a bit more from both sides, both partners. And yeah, as I say, at worst, I think it results in poor client outcomes and poorly kind of arranged financial situations. So that's one side of things. And I think the other is on the kind of mentorship and development side, so the team side. And I guess what I'm coming to realise and really strongly believe is, if we want young, up and coming, next gen planners coming through businesses who are able to, take on the clients from older financial planners often, or, take on running of businesses in the future, we need them to be able to think for themselves. We don't want to create carbon copies of the older, financial planner. And I think what I've seen over the years is a bit of a watch me, do what I do, and when you're enough like me, then you can see some of my clients. And that, I think, is a massive missed opportunity. I think people leave firms. I think young people are leaving firms because they're kind of faced with that, where they've been promised development. But I also think, you're just missing a huge opportunity. What you want to do, I think, as a and I'd probably put myself in this camp now, as an older person within the industry, and I'm not that old yet, as an older person within the industry, a more experienced person, you want to pass on knowledge, you want to pass on experience, and you want the people who are coming up to ultimately become better than you. And you want them to be able to think for themselves, like to take your experience, your knowledge, and to be able to think for themselves about it, because then they can come across any client situation and apply those ways of thinking to it. They can come across any kind of leadership situation in the future and they can think for themselves about it. So I think those are the kind of two key places that I could see the thinking environment could really help.
Yeah. Some of the for instance, some of the people in NextGen have like, they haven't coined this term, but they've certainly brought it into financial planning, of intrapreneurship, which is the idea that you get to think for yourself and kind of recommend new ways to do things in your financial planning business. That to me sounds like a bit of a knock on to the thinking environment kind of stuff, which is that, everybody has a chance to say what they think the future of the financial planning business should look like, rather than, like you say, watch how I do, learn how I do it, and then do it when I leave. That's not inspiring, really, is it? I think that's not, you're following in someone else's footsteps rather than going your own route. So yeah, I completely agree with both of those points. And certainly on the listening side, I think that I think listening is getting so much better in financial planning now. Like, as it becomes a proper, true profession rather than kind of what it used to be like in the 80s and 90s. This kind of stuff is natural now, like the better listening. I think financial planners nowadays are talking a lot less in client meetings, which is a brilliant sign. Rather than talking to their clients, they're listening to their clients and then giving their opinions on what's best for them. So, yeah, it's really good. Just a few more points before we close the podcast. Obviously, you mentioned at the start that you work at Embry Little as their operations director, and I must say that it's one of the best cultures I've seen in the financial planning business. I know with a few of the guys there. You know, Joe is our non-executive director here at NextGen, so I know that what the culture is like at Embry Little, and it's fantastic. And culture is being talked about a lot at the moment in financial planning, partially because of the FCA's consumer duty and stuff like that. But I think it's a great thing that we're talking about culture. And I think we're realizing nowadays, I always say that culture is more than just bean bags and kind of like, you know, perk apps and all that kind of stuff. Even remote working, you know, like it's kind of like a hygiene thing now. You expect that kind of stuff. It's not really a sign of a good culture. I think good culture is like, you know, having a truly rewarding job where you are rewarded for good work, but it's challenging at the same time. And it's also safe. You get the opportunities to think about these things. You get the opportunity to say what you feel. That is a sign of a great culture, in my opinion, obviously. So I'm just interested to what are some of the things that you guys at Embry still use to create that great culture that other financial planning firms could also use to create a great culture in their business. What are some of the kind of key things that you guys use over there?
So yeah, I mean, I agree. I love it. I think our culture is amazing. And it's been very intentional. So I think the first thing I would say is that as any leader in a business, you are creating a culture, whether or not you're doing it intentionally. And that's a big thing that we've learned. You know, we've gone through an awful lot at Embry Little, and there's been, you know, big changes. And when Joe took over as CEO, we were really intentional as the leadership team. Like, this is what we want our culture to be. These are our values. This is, I think, really importantly, our values aren't words on the wall. They're not just, you know, they're not just words on the wall that everyone talks about and, you know, nobody does anything with. We know what those values look like in practice, and so do the team. We talk about it all the time. You know, that was an example of great trust. That was an example. Like, it is, like, connection is one of our core values. What's going on here that might be damaging connection? Connection is really important because connection builds trust. So really kind of making your values part of the language that you're using all of the time. We spent a good amount of time creating, we call it our vision on a page. Absolutely love it. We've got, you know, this is what we believe. This is what our greatest imaginable challenge is. This is what our purpose is. These are our values. And we come back to that again and again. We spend time talking about it with the team, and spend time with the team thinking about it as well. You know, what do these things look like? When have you seen one of our values demonstrated in the last month? You know, those sorts of questions. We even had, so for our Christmas do at the end of last year, it was great fun. We had a party because we finally were allowed to, and we had an awards ceremony. And our awards ceremony was based around our core values. So I think I think that's the one thing I would say, be really intentional about it, because if you are talking about it, your values are actionable, you're walking your talk, which is super important. I think as leaders in a business, you've got to live it yourself. You can't be like, do as I say, not as I do. Doesn't work with kids. It certainly doesn't work with grown-ups. You know, I think they're the key points. So I think it's more kind of principles-based stuff than anything else that we've seen make a big difference.
Yeah, that's great. I certainly agree with your point on values as well. Values to us is something where if one of those gets flaunted, it hurts. And I think that's how you know when it's a real value. Like connection, for instance, if connection gets broken and it hurts, that's when you know you value it. Integrity, honesty, all those kind of things that are usual brochure values. they're just human values that hurts. Like you don't like being lied to, you don't like when someone rips you off and stuff like that. But what really hurts you on a daily basis, if it was broken, and that's how you find your true values. And I think a lot of financial planning firms have great values. Like maybe it's just a case of checking in with those every now and again, which is something that you guys obviously do very well as well. Um, yeah, and I also agree with being intentional as well. Kind of start with the idea that you're going to build a great culture, not that it just comes as a result of you being a nice person. Like make it very intentional from day one that you will build a great culture here that goes beyond just having a mini fridge in the office with beers, because that again, like that's not a sign of a great culture. It's I mean it's a sign of it might be a sign of great culture, but there's other things that are really more important than that kind of stuff. So we asked this question. This is the final serious question, by the way, before we start to get a bit loopy at the end. We ask everyone about the future of financial planning. So I was talking about this literally today, actually, with someone about the kind of we have some things to get through. I think everyone in the audience would definitely agree with that. There are certainly things that we need to change in financial planning. But what are you most excited to see in the profession in the next 10 years? Like if you could think of one thing that you're really super duper excited to see, what would that be?
Oh man, it's only
Oh no,
one.
sorry, it doesn't have to be one thing. I don't know why I limited it to one for you, because I never limited to one for anyone else. So have as many as you like. Go on for 3 hours.
Thanks. Yeah, I probably won't go on that long. I'll try not to. Um, Actually, like the first thing that comes into my mind, and maybe this is my ops director hat on, is tech. We are crying out for decent CRM tech in this industry. Like if that happened, I think the potential that could be realized within firms is massive. So I think some really good tech would be just a massive tick. I'm really excited to see how we solve the advice gap, how we genuinely bring value to accumulators, to the people at the start of their career, because let's face it, that's probably when people need financial planning advice the most. Like how do we do that really, really well? So I'm excited to see how we solve that, because it's going to be solved. And I think the other thing, I'm really excited and hopeful to see more diversity in the industry. The average age of a financial planner is still 56. Next 5 or 10 years, an awful lot of that, and it's about to call them old guard, that's not fair. But where that average age has been coming down because of a lot of work that NextGen have been doing, and more people, it's becoming more of a profession that people are coming into younger. And at the kind of big headline, big hitter industry events, it's still very male, it's still very white, it's still very kind of older, middle-aged. And I'm really looking forward to seeing those kind of next generations coming through and it not being that anymore. That gets me really excited.
It's good. Yeah, if you just I think if people just took a look inside NextGen and saw the kind of people that are in there and the kind of things that they're doing, they would also get very excited, because I'm excited about that. All of the things that you mentioned there were pretty much all of the things that I think a lot of people in the audience would definitely agree with. Certainly the advice gap one as well. That's coming up a lot recently, which is interesting. So let's close things down then. So we like to always ask our guests for a book or a piece of content. So I realized recently that not everyone reads books, because I realized that I don't read books, which is not a good sign. I'm trying to get better. But I've equally got a lot of things from YouTube videos, podcasts, and stuff like that. So I've widened it out to or a piece of content. Most people go for books, but things that have really helped you kind of clear your thinking. Now, in your case, I know that one of the books is probably going to be by Nancy Klein, because that's where the thinking environment comes from. So I might have ruined it there, but what would you recommend our audience consume?
Yeah, first of all, Time to Think. without hesitation for everybody, just a life book. I think it's amazing. So yeah, Time to Think by Nancy Kline. But the other one that really comes to mind, and this is the book, but also the podcast series that kind of accompanies it and is ongoing, is Dare to Lead by Brené Brown. Her leadership style, it's been really influential for me. The work that she's done on vulnerability, I think vulnerability in leadership is huge. There isn't, you don't need to have all the answers. It makes it more collaborative. I think it works really, really well with the thinking environment. And yeah, her podcast is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And the people that she gets on it and the people she talks to are all fantastic. So yeah, I would definitely read Dare to Lead. And have you got an Audible subscription? Like, that was the thing that got me into listening to books. I definitely find I can find time for.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I got Blinkist, which is kind of like a shortened version of audiobooks, which worked for a while, but then again my brain just switched off after a while, and it's like not great. So I'm trying to do my very best. But those are really good recommendations, and I think we'll definitely consume them. So thank you very much for them. So yeah, I mean we'll close it there, but that's all for today. But what we do always like to do is we like to give the last word on our podcast to our fantastic guests, to say a big thank you for coming on the show. So can you tell our audience how to connect with you, where to find you, and if you want to, I always give people the option to leave us with a bit of inspiration if they want to. But yeah, tell us where we can find you and connect with you.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, check out my website where I'm just whenwethink.me. And if you want to drop me an email, I'm always happy to hear from people. And I'm just Becca at whenwethink.me. I'm on LinkedIn, although I think I'm Rebecca Timmins on rather than Becca on LinkedIn. So feel free to connect. And also, do check out the Emery Little website as well. We're just emerylittle.com. Loads of great stuff. We redid our website earlier this year, actually. And yeah, I love it. I'm really proud of it now. So do check out what we're all about at Emery Little as well. I'm not sure about inspiring, Dan. I don't know if I do.
It's unfair of me to put that on people, to be fair, especially when I don't tell you in advance. But I think, to be fair, it's been very, very inspiring today to listen to all of this kind of stuff anyways. So I think that'll be that'll be enough for everyone today. But again, a big thank you for coming on the show. It's been really, really nice chatting with you. So that was Becca Timmins from When We Think on the NextGen Planners podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can, of course, find it on Spotify, Apple, Google, and our website. And you can share it with your friends and colleagues. And our website is nextgenplanners.co.uk, where you'll find more information about our training contract, our amazing community of 800 financial service heroes, and Advice Stack, which is our accelerator program to help people launch and grow their awesome financial planning businesses. And we've also got a conference coming up in 2023, which you can sign up to get notified about right now. And we're also on the big social media sites, of course. We are on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Recently, actually, we've also on TikTok as well. So check us out on there. It's not the best, to be fair, but we're doing our very best that we can. And of course, if you want to leave us a review, please do so. It really does help us grow and promote the podcast, and it really does help us to figure out what we're doing well. But for now, that's all from us. So I must say a big thank you once again to Becca for joining us on today's show. Thank you guys at home for listening as always, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.